The first time Ranger started barking at the frozen well behind the Mercer Ranch, Wyatt thought the old military dog was losing his mind. It was nearly 2 in the morning in the mountains outside Cody, Wyoming. Snow hammered the windows hard enough to shake the glass, and the wind screamed across the empty fields like something alive out there in the dark. Wyatt had already been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with a half-empty bottle of bourbon and a stack of unopened letters from the VA he had no intention of reading. Then came the barking, not normal barking, not warning barking. This was different, sharp, panicked, violent, the kind of barking Wyatt remembered from Afghanistan. Right before explosions tore through convoys. By the time he pulled on his coat and stepped outside, Ranger was already halfway across the snow-covered property, claws tearing through ice as he lunged toward the old stone well behind the barn. Ranger, the Belgian Malinois, ignored him. That alone made Wyatt's stomach tighten. For 8 years, Ranger had obeyed commands faster than most soldiers Wyatt served beside overseas. The dog had saved lives in Kandahar, Helmand, and places so blacked out on military maps they barely officially existed. Now the retired combat dog stood rigid beside the frozen well, growling low into the darkness beneath the ice-covered opening. Wyatt moved closer slowly. The dog's fur stood up along his spine. Then Ranger looked at Wyatt with something he had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. And when Wyatt finally aimed his flashlight down into the frozen well, he saw something buried beneath the snow and ice at the bottom. A military duffel bag, olive green, half frozen, and marked with the faded black letters, U.S. Army, property of Staff SGT Eli Turner. Wyatt's blood went cold because Eli Turner had been officially dead for 3 years, and Ranger had just found something the Army claimed never existed. The storm swallowed the ranch before sunrise. Sheriff Nolan Briggs arrived just after dawn in a snow-covered cruiser, his boots crunching across the frozen ground while Ranger watched him from the porch without blinking. The dog didn't bark, didn't move, but Wyatt noticed something unsettling. Ranger's body tightened the moment Nolan stepped out of the vehicle. The sheriff removed his gloves slowly. "You sure it's Eli Turner's?" Wyatt nodded once. The sheriff climbed down into the frozen well with a rope and flashlight while Wyatt stood above beside Ranger. Wind whipped across the property hard enough to sting exposed skin. 10 minutes later, Nolan climbed back up carrying the duffel. The sheriff's face looked pale. "What's inside?" Wyatt asked. Nolan hesitated. "That's the strange part." He unzipped the bag carefully on the hood of the cruiser. Inside sat military documents wrapped in plastic. Several old combat photographs, a rusted handgun, and one blood-stained combat harness Ranger instantly recognized. The dog lunged forward so violently Wyatt barely grabbed the collar in time. Ranger whined deep in his throat, pawing desperately at the harness. Wyatt froze. He remembered that harness. Eli Turner used to wear it during classified field operations overseas. Ranger had been assigned to Eli before. Wyatt took over handling duties during their final deployment. But according to official military reports, Eli died during an insurgent ambush near the Pakistan border. Body never recovered. Mission sealed. Case closed. So why was his gear hidden inside an abandoned well in Wyoming? Sheriff Briggs stared at the photos carefully. "You mind if I take these?" Wyatt noticed Ranger growling again. Not at the bag, at Nolan. Low, quiet, dangerous. The sheriff glanced down nervously. "Dog doesn't like me much. Ranger doesn't react without reason." Nolan forced a smile. "Maybe war memories, maybe." But Wyatt knew combat dogs better than most people knew their own families. Military dogs didn't forget danger, especially Ranger. That night, the snowstorm worsened. Wyatt sat beside the fireplace while Ranger paced the cabin non-stop. The dog refused food. Refused water. Every few minutes, he stopped beside the back door, ears twitching toward the darkness outside. Then around midnight, Ranger suddenly froze. A vehicle approached. Headlights swept across the snowy ranch. Ranger exploded into violent barking before the truck even stopped. Wyatt reached for the pistol under the table. The knocking came hard, 3 sharp hits. Wyatt opened the door carefully. Claire Holloway stood outside, shivering beneath a thick winter coat. She looked exhausted, terrified, and the moment Ranger saw her, everything changed. The dog stopped barking instantly, then slowly walked forward and pressed his head against her trembling hand. Claire started crying. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He remembers me." Wyatt frowned. "You knew Ranger?" Claire nodded weakly. "I knew Eli." The fire cracked softly while snow battered the cabin windows. Claire sat wrapped in a blanket while Ranger refused to leave her side. The dog kept his body pressed against her legs, like he was guarding her from something invisible. Wyatt watched carefully. "Start talking." Claire stared into the flames for several seconds before answering. "I worked intelligence analysis at Fort Carson," she said quietly. "Eli Turner contacted me 2 weeks before he supposedly died." Wyatt leaned forward. "What did he say?" "He said someone inside the operation betrayed their unit overseas. Said soldiers were getting killed because classified movement routes were being leaked." The room fell silent. Wyatt's pulse slowed. "Combat betrayal. The worst kind," Claire continued carefully. "Eli said he found evidence, names, transaction, records, communications. He told me if anything happened to him, the truth would disappear." Wyatt glanced toward Ranger. The dog stared directly at Claire, alert and focused like he understood every word. "What evidence?" Claire swallowed hard. "He hid it." "Where?" "That's the problem." Her voice shook. "Before he vanished, Eli told me one thing." Wyatt waited. Claire looked at Ranger. "He said if nobody else survived, the dog would remember." The cabin suddenly felt colder. Ranger stood abruptly and walked toward the back door again, growling. "Low. Dangerous." Then headlights appeared outside the cabin. Another vehicle. This time, Ranger's reaction was immediate, violent. The dog launched toward the window, snarling so aggressively Wyatt barely recognized him. Claire turned pale. "What's wrong with him?" But Wyatt already knew. Ranger wasn't afraid. He recognized someone. Sheriff Nolan Briggs stepped onto the porch moments later, and Ranger looked ready to kill him. Wyatt opened the door halfway. Nolan removed snow from his shoulders. "Sorry to come this late." Ranger lunged forward, snarling. Wyatt tightened his grip on the collar. The sheriff eyed the dog uneasily. "Hell's gotten into him. What do you want?" Nolan glanced past Wyatt and noticed Claire instantly. For just 1 second, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then concern. "Claire Holloway," he said slowly. "Didn't expect you in town." Claire stood carefully. "Neither did I." The silence between them felt wrong, like history lived there. Nolan cleared his throat. "Listen, I checked those documents from the well, and most files are corrupted. Water damage." Wyatt didn't miss the lie. Neither did Ranger. The dog barked sharply. Nolan stepped back slightly. "But there's something else," the sheriff continued. "Someone broke into the evidence locker tonight." Wyatt frowned. "What?" "The bag's gone." Claire's face drained of color. Nolan lowered his voice. "Whoever hid that evidence may not be finished yet." After the sheriff left, Ranger remained beside the door for nearly an hour, watching, listening, waiting. Then finally, the dog walked toward Wyatt and dropped something at his feet. A torn piece of fabric, dark green camouflage. Wyatt stared at it carefully. Fresh tear. Wet snow still clung to it. Ranger must have ripped it from someone outside. Claire crouched beside him. Her voice became barely audible. "That pattern." Wyatt looked up. "What?" Claire swallowed. "That's not Army issue." "Then what is it?" She looked toward the darkness outside the cabin. "Private contractor gear." Wyatt barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, Afghanistan came back. Dust storms. Gunfire. Blood in the sand. Ranger barking beside burning vehicles while helicopters circled overhead. And Eli Turner screaming over the radio seconds before everything went silent. By dawn, Wyatt sat drinking black coffee while Ranger stared out the window toward the tree line beyond the ranch. Then suddenly the dog stiffened. He sprinted outside before Wyatt could react. "Ranger!" Snow blasted across the fields while Wyatt chased after him. The Malinois tore toward the woods behind the property with terrifying speed. Wyatt followed tracks through deep snow until he spotted Ranger near an abandoned hunting cabin hidden among pine trees. The dog barked furiously at the front door. Wyatt drew his pistol slowly. The cabin looked empty, old, rotting. But Ranger refused to back away. Wyatt pushed the door open carefully. Inside smelled like mold and cold ashes. Then he noticed it. Fresh footprints. Someone had been there recently. Ranger moved straight toward a loose floorboard near the fireplace. Pawing, digging, whining desperately. Wyatt pried the board loose with a rusted knife. Underneath sat a small metal lockbox. Inside were military dog tags, a flash drive, and a folded handwritten note. Wyatt unfolded it slowly. If Ranger finds this, it means they're already watching. Tell Claire not to trust Briggs. Wyatt's heartbeat stopped. The note continued. Operation Black Ridge wasn't a failed mission. It was a cleanup. Someone sold us out. They buried the truth with us. But Ranger saw everything. The wind outside suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Then Ranger growled. Wyatt turned sharply toward the window. Someone stood between the trees watching the cabin. Tall figure. Dark coat. Motionless. Then the figure disappeared into the woods. Wyatt sprinted outside. Nothing. Only snow. But Ranger kept barking toward the forest like the war had followed them home. Back at the ranch, Claire stared at Eli's note with shaking hands. Wyatt inserted the flash drive into an old laptop. Static flickered across the screen. Then corrupted military footage appeared. Helmet camera video. Night operation. Gunfire. Soldiers moving through narrow mountain terrain overseas. Wyatt recognized the mission instantly. Black Ridge, the operation officially listed as an insurgent ambush. But the footage told a different story. The convoy had stopped before entering the canyon. Someone on the radio warned enemy fighters were already waiting. Then a voice spoke clearly through static. Abort route. Coordinates compromised. Wyatt's blood froze. That voice belonged to Nolan Briggs. Years before becoming sheriff, Briggs had worked private security contracting overseas. Claire whispered, "Oh my God." The footage continued. Eli appeared briefly on screen beside Ranger. Then explosions erupted. Chaos. Screaming. Gunfire from both sides. But one detail changed everything. Enemy fighters already knew their exact position, exact timing, exact route. It was a setup. Then the final seconds played. Eli shoved something into Ranger's harness. Go! The dog sprinted into darkness while bullets tore through the canyon. Video ended. Silence filled the room. Claire covered her mouth. Wyatt stared at the frozen screen. Ranger walked slowly beside him and rested his head against Wyatt's knee, like he remembered every second. The entire official story had been a lie. And now Wyatt understood something terrifying. Ranger hadn't found the evidence by accident. The dog had been searching for years. Someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Wyatt grabbed the pistol instantly. Ranger barked viciously. Through the window, Wyatt saw Sheriff Briggs standing alone in falling snow. But this time, the sheriff looked nervous. Really nervous. Wyatt opened the door slightly. Nolan raised both hands. "We need to talk. You lied about Black Ridge." The sheriff's face tightened immediately. "You watched the footage. You sold them out." "No!" Nolan snapped. "You don't understand." Ranger snarled. Claire stepped forward. "Eli trusted you." Nolan looked genuinely shaken by that. Then he lowered his voice. "They killed him because he found out who was actually behind it." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Before Nolan could answer, gunshots exploded through the windows. Glass shattered everywhere. Claire screamed. Ranger lunged across the room as bullets ripped through the cabin walls. Wyatt dragged Claire behind the table while Nolan drew his weapon outside. More gunfire echoed from the woods. Professional shooters. Controlled bursts. Not random. Ranger barked wildly near the hallway window. Then Wyatt saw them. 3 armed men moving through the snow toward the ranch. Private tactical gear. Suppressors, military formation. Someone had come for the evidence. Nolan fired twice from the porch before diving behind his cruiser. "Get out the back!" he shouted. Wyatt grabbed the laptop and flash drive while Claire struggled into her coat. Ranger positioned himself beside them instantly. Protective, focused. The old combat dog transformed completely. No hesitation, no fear. Pure military instinct. They escaped through the rear barn while gunfire tore apart the cabin behind them. Snow whipped violently across the ranch as Wyatt led Claire toward the tree line. Ranger suddenly stopped, barking, refusing to move. "What is it?" Wyatt yelled. Then he saw it. One attacker circling around behind Claire. The man raised a rifle. Ranger attacked before Wyatt could react. The Malinois launched through the snow like a missile. The rifle fired once, then disappeared beneath snarling fur and chaos. The attacker screamed. Wyatt fired 2 shots. Silence followed. Ranger stood over the wounded gunman, growling violently. The dog's muzzle bled from a grazing bullet wound. Claire dropped beside him instantly. "Oh, God!" But Ranger ignored the pain completely. Still protecting, still scanning, still working. Like the war never ended. They reached an abandoned fire lookout deep in the Wyoming mountains just before dawn. Nolan arrived an hour later after ditching his damaged cruiser. Snow covered his shoulders as he entered the lookout tower. Wyatt aimed the pistol immediately. "You've got 1 minute." Nolan looked exhausted. Older somehow. "I didn't betray Black Ridge. The footage says otherwise." "No," Nolan said quietly. "The footage proves someone intercepted our route. I tried warning them." Claire frowned. "Then who leaked it?" Nolan hesitated. "Defense contractors." Wyatt's expression hardened. The sheriff continued. "Black Ridge wasn't just military. Private companies were running covert weapons transport through the region. Eli discovered someone was selling Operation Intel to insurgents while collecting insurance. Payouts on destroyed cargo." Claire stared in disbelief. "You're saying American contractors got soldiers killed for money?" Nolan looked sick answering it. "Yes." The tower fell silent except for wind hammering the walls. Wyatt looked toward Ranger resting near the heater. The dog kept waking suddenly every few minutes. Combat trauma. Always listening. Always expecting danger. "Why kill Eli?" Wyatt asked. "Because he recorded names," Nolan answered. "Bank accounts, transfers, evidence tying executives to combat leaks. And the army covered it up?" "No, a few people inside did," Claire whispered. "Who?" Nolan finally answered. "Senator Marcus Vance." Wyatt froze. Everyone in Wyoming knew the name. Decorated veteran. Political hero. Future presidential candidate. Untouchable. Nolan continued quietly. "Vance funded the contracting company overseas. Eli discovered the connection before Black Ridge." Claire shook her head slowly. "That's impossible. Tell that to the men buried over there." Ranger suddenly stood, ears forward, growling again. Nolan looked confused. "What now?" Then headlights appeared below the mountain lookout. Multiple vehicles. Coming fast. Wyatt cursed under his breath. "They tracked us." Gunfire erupted seconds later. Bullets slammed into the tower walls. Claire ducked low while Wyatt returned fire through shattered windows. Ranger barked ferociously beside the staircase. The attackers moved with military precision. Ex-special forces, maybe. Professional killers. Nolan reloaded quickly. "There's too many." Wyatt glanced toward Ranger. The dog suddenly sprinted downstairs. "Ranger!" But the Malinois ignored him. Seconds later, barking echoed outside near the vehicles. Then explosions erupted below the mountain. One SUV burst into flames. The attackers scattered instantly. Wyatt stared in disbelief. Nolan looked shocked. "What the hell did that dog do?" Wyatt remembered the footage. Eli had trained Ranger for explosive detection and sabotage operations. The dog must have smelled fuel or ammunition inside the vehicles. Ranger's barking echoed through smoke and snow, buying them time. They escaped through the rear slope while flames consumed the mountainside. Hours later, they reached an old church near the edge of town. Father Ben Navarro opened the doors without questions. Wyatt hadn't seen him since returning from overseas years earlier. The priest looked toward Ranger quietly. "That dog still carries war in his eyes." Wyatt nodded once. "Yeah." Inside the church basement, Claire examined the remaining files recovered from Eli's lockbox. Bank records, coordinates, encrypted names. One location appeared repeatedly. Cold water storage facility. Outside Cody. Nolan's face darkened instantly. "That's Vance property." "What's there?" "Archives, maybe. Financial records." Wyatt understood immediately. "The rest of Eli's evidence." Claire looked terrified. "If we go there, we finish this." Ranger stood the moment Wyatt said it. Ready. Like he knew the mission. That night, snow fell softly across the Wyoming countryside while 4 figures approached. Cold water storage through darkness. Massive fences surrounded the facility. Security patrols moved between warehouse buildings. Ranger stayed low beside Wyatt, silent and focused. The dog's entire posture had changed again. Combat mode. Wyatt whispered, "You remember this place, don't you?" Ranger glanced up briefly, then pulled Wyatt toward the eastern fence. The dog stopped near a hidden drainage tunnel barely visible beneath snow. Nolan exhaled sharply. How'd he know that was there? Wyatt already understood. Ranger had been there before, years ago. The tunnel led beneath the facility, into a storage building, filled with crates and filing cabinets. Dust coated everything, but Ranger moved confidently deeper inside, then stopped beside a steel office door, growling. Wyatt forced it open. Inside sat shelves packed with military documents, hard drives, payment ledgers, photos from overseas operations. Claire stared around in horror. "This could destroy careers." "No," Nolan whispered. "This destroys governments." Then Ranger suddenly barked toward the far wall. Wyatt moved closer. There was another door hidden behind shelves, locked electronically. Nolan aimed his flashlight at the keypad. "Restricted archive." Claire stepped back slowly. "What if somebody's still here?" Before anyone answered, a voice echoed through the darkness. "Oh, somebody's definitely here." The light switched on instantly. Senator Marcus Vance stood at the far end of the warehouse, surrounded by armed men. Perfect gray coat, calm expression, like he'd been waiting. Ranger snarled violently. Vance looked at the dog carefully. "So that's the famous Ranger." Wyatt raised his weapon. "Move your men." Vance almost smiled. "You know, Eli Turner was stubborn too." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "You murdered him." "No," Vance replied coldly. "War murdered him. I simply survived it better than others." Ranger barked furiously. The senator glanced down. "That animal cost me millions." Wyatt's finger tightened on the trigger. Vance continued calmly. "Do you really think America wants the truth? Soldiers dying because politicians profit from endless war?" He shook his head. "People prefer heroes. You set them up. I protected national interests." Claire shouted, "You slaughtered your own men!" Vance's face hardened instantly. Then Ranger did something unexpected. The dog broke formation and sprinted toward the hidden archive door. Gunmen raised weapons. Wyatt fired first. Chaos exploded through the warehouse. Bullets shattered glass and steel while Ranger slammed into the archive keypad. The hidden door swung partially open. Inside sat rows of servers and document cases. Nolan shot 2 guards while Claire grabbed files desperately. Vance retreated toward the rear exit. Wyatt chased him through the warehouse while gunfire echoed everywhere. Snow blasted inside through broken windows. Then Wyatt heard Ranger barking again, desperate, urgent. The dog stood inside the archive room, beside a small locked cabinet mounted to the wall. Wyatt shot the lock open. Inside sat a single video recorder labeled Black Ridge, Original Report. Wyatt stared at it. The real evidence, the final truth. Vance saw it too. His face changed completely. "Give me that." He raised his pistol toward Claire. Ranger attacked instantly. The Belgian Malinois launched across the room and slammed into Vance before he could fire. The senator crashed backward into metal shelving. Gunshots erupted wildly. One round struck Ranger in the side. The dog yelped. Wyatt fired once. Vance collapsed hard against the concrete floor. Silence followed. Heavy, frozen. Ranger stumbled. Claire dropped beside him immediately. "No, no, no." Blood spread across the dog's fur. Wyatt knelt beside Ranger while the Malinois struggled to stay alert. The dog looked at Wyatt exactly the way he used to after combat missions overseas, waiting for the next command, waiting to know everybody survived. Wyatt's throat tightened painfully. "It's okay, buddy." Ranger's breathing slowed. Then the dog gently pushed his nose against the video recorder in Wyatt's hand, like finishing the mission mattered more than his own life. Weeks later, the story exploded across America. The Black Ridge Files exposed years of corruption tied to covert wartime contracts and illegal military profiteering. Senator Marcus Vance resigned before federal indictments arrived. Several officials vanished into investigations. Families of fallen soldiers finally learned the truth about what happened overseas. And through all of it, one image spread across every news station in the country. A scarred, retired Belgian Malinois lying beside a folded American flag. Ranger survived the surgery, barely. The bullet missed his heart by less than an inch. But the old military dog would never fully recover physically. Wyatt didn't care. The ranch changed after that winter. The nightmares came less often. Claire stayed in Wyoming, helping expose the remaining Black Ridge records. Sheriff Nolan Briggs finally stopped carrying guilt alone. And Ranger? Ranger slowly learned how to rest again. Some nights, the dog still woke barking at invisible memories only he could see. Some nights he paced the property, searching shadows that no longer existed. But eventually he always returned to the porch beside Wyatt, watching snow fall quietly across the mountains. Together, in early spring, the town organized a memorial for the soldiers lost during Black Ridge. People arrived from across Wyoming. Veterans, families, reporters, Gold Star mothers carrying folded photographs against their chests. The ceremony took place beneath a gray sky beside the small sheriff's memorial outside town. Wyatt stood wearing his old army dress jacket for the first time in years. Beside him sat Ranger, older now, slower, one side still shaved from surgery scars, but alert, always alert. Father Navarro finished the prayer softly while wind moved through the crowd. Then Sheriff Briggs stepped toward the microphone. "There are heroes whose names we remember," he said quietly, "and others history almost buries." He looked toward Ranger. "But sometimes the ones carrying the truth home walk on four legs." Several people began crying immediately. Briggs swallowed hard before continuing. "This dog served his country overseas, then came home and finished a mission everyone else tried to erase." The sheriff removed a folded military ribbon from his pocket. "For extraordinary loyalty, bravery, and service beyond combat operations." He knelt slowly beside Ranger. "We honor Sergeant Ranger." The crowd stood instantly. Applause echoed through the snowy valley while Wyatt felt tears burning his eyes for the first time since Afghanistan. Ranger didn't react to the noise. The old combat dog simply stared toward the distant mountains, watching, listening, like part of him still waited for soldiers who never made it home. That evening, Wyatt sat alone on the porch while snow drifted softly across the ranch again. Ranger lay beside him beneath a thick blanket. The Wyoming sky glowed dark blue beyond endless pine forests. Quiet, peaceful. Finally peaceful. Wyatt scratched gently behind the dog's ears. "You carried all of it alone, didn't you?" Ranger closed his eyes slowly. Wyatt looked across the frozen fields toward the old well where everything began. One frightened military dog barking into darkness because the dead still deserved the truth. A cold wind moved through the mountains. But for the first time in years, it no longer sounded like war. Wyatt glanced down at Ranger, the scars, the cloudy eyes, the gray beginning to spread around the muzzle. This dog had crossed deserts, survived gunfire, uncovered corruption, and dragged buried ghosts back into the light. And somehow, after all that violence, all that death, Ranger still chose loyalty, still chose people, still chose home. Wyatt's voice cracked slightly. "Good boy." The old Belgian Malinois rested his head against Wyatt's boot while snow covered the ranch in silence. And somewhere far beyond the Wyoming mountains, the men lost during Black Ridge were finally no longer forgotten.